that was it, was it? Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Keith Wellham and I'm chairing the meeting today. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure that your mobile phones and any other devices are on silent or switched off. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I'll just run through a list of people who are attending. Councillor Jan Osborne is here as Babergh District Council Cabinet Member for Housing and will be introducing the housing item. Offices are Rebecca Ward, Housing Strategy and Policy Officer, Amma Yantwi Yaboa, Housing Solutions Corporate Manager, Robert Longfoot, Corporate Manager, Tenant Services. We also have Jan Robinson, Corporate Manager of Law and Governments, and Alicia Norman, to my left, is the Lead Officer for Overview and Scrutiny, and also we're being assisted by Henriette Holloway and Bethany Webb this morning. So can I move to the agenda, please? Item 1 is apologies for absence and any substitutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Terence Carter with Councillor John Matheson substituting this morning, and we also have apologies from Councillor Robert Lindsay.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary or other registrable or non-registrable interest by members, please? There are none. To receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme, have we received any, please?
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Chair, Councillor.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm just thinking that on the homes and housing front, whether I need to declare a non-pecuniary interest as I'm Chairman of the Mid-Suffolk Growth Limited.
Well, shall we note that? We'll note that. But it's not an interest, which means that Councillor Epignon can't speak, is it? He can speak and vote. Yeah, thank you very much. Right, we're now going on to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of September. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes, please? Would anybody like to propose that we accept the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Caston. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Epignon. The Governance Officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That is 5 votes for and 4 abstentions. So that's carried.
That's carried. Thank you very much. The minutes of the meeting on the 30th of September 2022 have been confirmed. Are there any questions by the public, please?
None received, Chair.
And any questions by councillors, please?
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move on to the annual review update of the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy and the Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy 2019 to 2024. This is item JOS 2217. And I'd like to invite the Cabinet Member for Housing for Babergh to please introduce the report to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce to you for consideration and scrutiny today the annual update of the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy and Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy 2019 to 2024. In March 2019, members of all political parties unanimously approved the adoption of the first Joint Homes and Housing Strategy and Joint Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy. These strategies commit us to be open and transparent, providing information on how we are performing against the strategic aims set out within these documents. So as part of adoption, a commitment was made to report back to Overview and Scrutiny Committee for an annual review and update to members. This is the third annual update of the progress made against the strategies. The annual update this year includes a presentation of a refreshed Homes and Housing Strategy. The document is the same as the 2019 version, but the data, supporting documents and references have been updated to ensure that only the most recent and relevant information is used in support of the vision and aims of the strategy. The delivery plan has also been refocused to include policy priorities and emerging themes that weren't around when the original strategy and delivery plan was written in 2019. Today, I ask that members review the contents of this report and appendices, along with verbal contributions. Scrutiny should focus on the strategic aims and the progress with the delivery. Rebecca Ward, our Housing Strategy and Policy Officer, who has responsibility for the analysis of performance and monitoring of this strategy, is with us today and will now provide you with a presentation which shows the progress to date and the future actions planned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Over to you, Rebecca.
Right. Good morning, councillors. This presentation will provide you with more detail and context around the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy and the Joint Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy. Closer, sure. Is that better? Okay, I'll start again then. This presentation will provide you with more detail and context around the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy and the Joint Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy. We will be focusing on what has been achieved, what has changed since the last time the strategies came to overview and scrutiny in September 2021, and what new actions officers will be prioritising in the coming year to further our collective progress towards achieving the vision and the strategic aims of the strategies. Okay, so to start with some background and context, the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy and the Joint Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy were both adopted in March 2019. And as we know, the world has changed significantly since then, and new policy priorities have emerged that were not included in the original strategy document and the delivery plan. The strategies had a lifespan of 5 years, from 2019 to 2024. The strategies reached the midpoint of that lifespan in September 2021. And in August of 2021, Cabinet members and housing staff were briefed on the proposal to relaunch the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy in 2022. Work has been undertaken this year under the steer of SLT and with the awareness of portfolio holders to refresh the joint homes and housing strategy and to refocus the associated delivery plan, to ensure that they continue to be relevant and focused on what actions we can prioritise to best work towards achieving the vision and the strategic aim of the strategies. I want to highlight here that the Joint Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy is a separate document to the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy. However, Strategic Aim 3 of the Homes and Housing Strategy, which is homelessness is prevented and our services provide positive and planned interventions, relates directly to the Homelessness Reduction and Rough Sleeping Strategy. This is a statutory document and will be formally reviewed and a new document published in 2024. Okay, to move on to some figures around the delivery plan. As of June 2020, there were 93 actions on the delivery plan. Following comments at last year's annual review of the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where it was noted that there was a large number of actions with ongoing as the target date, a streamlining exercise was undertaken, and as a result, actions that were considered to have become business as usual and fully embedded within the work of the teams have now been marked as complete. As a result of this streamlining, of the 93 actions on the delivery plan, 52 have been marked as complete, and the 41 remaining actions yet to be completed have been transferred to the newly refocused delivery plan.
Councillor Pignon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could go back to that slide. I don't really understand these figures. There are 3 figures that have been transferred either from or to something. I'm not sure what they mean, and I'm not sure that the comment you just made about completed actions is consistent with what we're seeing on the chart. So I'd like a little bit more explanation of, are we saying basically that effectively there are 41 actions that are still outstanding or not?
Yeah, that is what we're saying. So that's the total of the 35 actions that were in progress, the 2 that were in progress with minor delays, and the 4 that were yet to commence. Those 41 have been transferred to the new delivery plan.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. And when are they due to be completed?
They've all got individual target dates on them, and I'll be talking about those actions as we go through the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on. So when we are talking about refreshing the strategy document and refocusing the delivery plan, what has actually changed? Well, firstly and importantly, the vision and the 9 strategic aims of the Joint Homes and Housing Strategy have not changed. They continue to be relevant and reflective of the Council's wider priorities, so they have remained as they are. The time frame has been removed and replaced with a date published. This is to better reflect that the strategy is an ever-evolving document rather than having a fixed start and end point. All references to supporting documents within the strategy document have been updated where an update has been available. This is to ensure that only the most current supplementary information is referenced. Likewise, any references that have become obsolete have been removed from the strategy document. All data referenced within the strategy has been updated where more current data is available. This has been done to ensure that the strategy is underpinned by the most relevant and current supporting data. Within the strategy document itself, a table has been added to the start of each strategic aim chapter, detailing what has been achieved, what is currently being worked on, and what actions will be targeted next. So moving on to the delivery plan, which is the living document working towards the achievement of the vision and the strategic aims. This document has been thoroughly refocused to include the new and emerging themes that were not around when the delivery plan was originally written back in 2019. 41 actions that were on the previous slide from the previous version of the delivery plan have been transferred to the new delivery plan, and an additional 21 new actions have been added, totaling 62 actions on the new delivery plan. The timescales and target dates have been tightened so that the document is less vague and more targeted. However, it's not been possible to entirely avoid using ongoing as a target date for some of the actions. An additional column is being added to the document detailing what success will look like. This will aid monitoring of the strategy, ensuring that there is clarity over when an action has been completed and enable us to better demonstrate the gains for residents. The document has been streamlined, as already outlined. Comments from the annual review of the Homes and Housing Strategy last September led to the archiving of actions that have become business as usual and fully embedded in the work of the teams. The delivery plan has also been dovetailed with the outcomes framework to ensure that we are clear which strategy actions are contributing to which outcomes, and I'll return to this later in the presentation. It should also be noted here that there are two versions of the delivery plan, a public version where there are no officer names, just job roles, and a member version that includes officer names as action leads. This is to aid with accountability and access for members, but to avoid officer names being in the public domain. And this is a result of comments at the ONS Chair's briefing earlier this month. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to look at each of the 9 strategic aims in turn, to look at what has been achieved, what new actions have been added in the refocus of the delivery plan, and what success will look like in the future. So, starting with strategic aim 1, which is the housing market functions effectively, providing homes which are as affordable as possible to meet the needs of residents and support the local economy. So in terms of achievements, we have published robust viability testing of the joint local plan, which gives confidence that both infrastructure and affordable housing needs can be met. We have improved our approach to discharging planning conditions by providing additional clarity on the information we require from developers in order to discharge conditions effectively. And we have encouraged and supported self-build and custom-build developers by setting out positive policies in the joint local plan.
Rebecca, can I just stop there just a second before you go on to the next part of the slide?
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Matheson.
Yeah, I was wondering, are you, I mean, I haven't been to Scrutiny for quite a while, are you taking questions and points as we go along or at the end, or how are we going to deal with that? I have a point on this slide, so I want to ask.
When would you like questions? Is it better at the end of the
I was
presentation?
envisaging that there would be questions at the end, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure how these things normally operate.
Yeah, and then the points will come up in debate after questions. Thank you. Councillor Ekpignon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With due respect, I don't think that's a very good way forward. Anyone who's looked at this presentation will see that there's a lot of detail in pretty much every page of this slide. And to ask us to wait to the end to recollect all the questions that we might like to ask through them all is not reasonable, I don't think. I think we should, while they're fresh in our minds, ask the questions as we move along. Thank you.
Would you be happy then
Yeah,
to
I'm
take
not- yeah.
questions on each of the slides in turn and then general questions at the end? Is that while this slide is on? When you finish describing the slide, have questions on the slide, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Is everyone happy with that approach? Thank you.
Shall I?
Right, you've got a question, Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah, on the achievements here, could you tell us the degree of success of actually encouraging and supporting self-build, etc.? I mean, I know the joint local plan is an emerging document, as we say. How many houses have we actually managed to get self-build or custom-built, thus far to state an achievement?
I can access the figures. It'll just take me a moment to get to the figures. Do you want me to come back to that question?
I wonder, could one of your colleagues look that up while you continue with the presentation? I don't think it will affect the presentation. And if we could see if we could have the description of the whole of the slide before any more questions on this slide and subsequent slides, please. Thank you.
any more questions about this one, or move on to the next slide?
Sorry, have you finished?
No, I haven't done. No, I haven't done. Okay, before we move on to talk about new actions added to this strategic aim, I want to highlight that there are 5 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. In addition, a new action has been added to the delivery plan, setting out our ambition to build or acquire 65 new homes in each district per year for each of the next 6 years, ensuring that all new build homes are in accordance with the Council's new design guide specification and the new parking strategy. This action is in alignment with details set out in the recently published Housing Revenue Account Business Plan. The success of this action will result in an increase of quality homes within the districts, which will contribute positively to meeting housing needs.
I think Councillor Hinton has got the answer to the question.
Oh, has he?
Yes, according to the annual monitoring report, page 18, Babergh had 47 self-builds last year, started, and Mid-Suffolk had 106.
A question from Councillor Hinton.
Just a quick question. Got it, yeah. On the design of houses, because this report is extremely comprehensive. Some might say it's too comprehensive because some of the subject matter keeps on reoccurring as it goes through, probably because the strategic aims are fairly close to each other. Design of houses, there's no mention anywhere of homes for life, which would mean that instead of building houses specifically for old people, we will be building houses that could be used by old people, but also it could be used by families in the interim. But I believe the portfolio holder's got an answer to that.
Yes, thank you,
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, if I can just clarify that the homes in here, the 65 homes, are the homes that are going to go towards social housing. And also with the social housing, we've got our own housing guide that that was approved at full council only a few months ago. And in that, it's got clear details about homes for life to be designed in that way. In regards to the developers, we'll try and use that design guide as much as possible, but obviously our hands are tied in making them do it, but we will use it where we possibly can with market builds as well. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Hinton.
Thank you. Councillor Eckmingham.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think it'd be fair to say that as far as the design guide is going, then from the council's point of view, then the growth companies are implementing those design guides, and that's certainly reflected in the quality of the build that's been finished off at the old Needham HQ site, where we've built the first 32 homes. So I think that we're on the right track there as far as that goes.
Thank you. Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure if this is going to be covered elsewhere, but can I just inquire about the size of the new homes built? There doesn't seem to be, in the past, enough smaller homes for people to downsize to then free up the larger homes for larger families or for families. And I wondered if that is has been looked into and catered for, please. So like 1-bedroom flats and that kind of thing.
There is an action, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation, that has been added with this refocus to look at a downsizing policy so that we can look at a more efficient use of the council's stock. Does that answer your question, or is it more about what size of houses we're building?
Both really. Sorry, both really, because I think they sort of work together, really, those two aspects. So, because I know there's been a problem, or I understand there's been a problem in the past where people could have downsized because of their need, but there was nothing for them to downsize into. So I wondered if your policy going forward is now catering for that type of situation?
I believe that the policy will cover that when it's in its infancy at the moment, but I think that will be covered when they look at the detail of the policy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on to the... Yeah, we've finished on that slide,
Yep.
Rebecca. We'll move on to the
one.
next slide. And can we just have questions that are specific to what's on that slide, and anything else we'll leave to the end, because it just might be covered as we go through.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
moving on to Strategic Aim 2, which is there is a wide and varied choice of good quality, sustainable homes of different sizes, types and tenures to meet the needs of a wide range of different households. In terms of achievements, we have provided advice and encouragement to community-led housing schemes on the formation of community land trusts with the objective of delivering new affordable housing. This is not a quick route to affordable housing, but provides a valuable contribution. We have published a framework for making investment decisions to increase the overall supply of affordable housing, making use of the housing revenue account and working collaboratively with housing associations. This affordable housing strategy is an appendix to the recently published Housing Revenue Account Business Plan. Before we move on to talk about the new actions added to this strategic aim, I want to highlight that there are 6 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. In terms of new actions, a new action has been added to this strategic aim to focus on a new policy to encourage tenants to downsize their homes. This will be approached sensitively, and the success of this action will result in a more efficient use of the council's housing stock.
Well, can we finish the slide first, and then we'll ask questions on the whole
that's
of
the
the
end of that slide. So questions.
Sorry?
That is the end of that slide.
Oh,
yeah.
Right, okay, fine, thank you. Councillor Grandin.
So, sorry, can I just sort of re-ask that question now that we seem to be on that slide? Could you tell me what that new policy means then, please, in relation to what I was asking? What it will, in a practical sense, please.
So the downsizing policy will be looking at incentives, I believe, to encourage people to who are over-occupying their property to look at moving to a smaller property, so freeing up a larger property for a household in need. And obviously that policy is dependent on there being a supply of the smaller properties being available. And I think I'm going to have to get back to you specifically about that if anybody else wants to jump in.
Yes, 'cause that does seem to have been the problem, and it doesn't seem to be that you're saying, and we will ensure that there is the supply of smaller properties for them to move into. So it's sort of, you're making this idealised situation where you're encouraging people to downsize, but if you haven't got anything to provide them, then that policy, it falls at the first hurdle, doesn't it? So that seems to be a little bit of a problem to me from what you're saying.
But I think this is a policy that's being developed, so we can't comment on a policy that's not yet available.
But it doesn't seem to be an intention.
Amma, did you want to respond?
I sort of want to add to what Rebecca has been saying. We're in the middle of developing an older person's housing strategy, looking at what type of housing, what the needs are for the older population. So that will look at what sort of tenure do people want to move into? Do they want sheltered? Do they want their own self-contained accommodation? Do they want bungalows? Do they want flats? So looking at truly engaging with older residents within Babergh and Mid-Suffolk to find out what those needs are, and trying to engage the whole population, having that conversation, because we recognise that we've got an ageing population. So in order to answer that question, we need to have that engagement first to find out what it is people want, then to look at how we're going to be delivering on that. And I think one of the first strands is always to talk to our existing tenants to see if there is an appetite for an under-occupation scheme. What does that look like? In some areas you have seaside and country homes. In some areas they get given additional preference. you give them some sort of incentive to help them to move. So it's all a movable feast at the moment. So it's something that we're currently exploring, and we'll come back with a more detailed policy.
Councillor Grant, you've got a follow-up question?
Yes, I have, thank you. But it's not only older people that may want to downsize to, say, a one-bedroomed accommodation. You know, it seems like perhaps it needs to be looked at as to what our supply is to meet, because it seems, as I understand it, that some people may be having to pay the extra rent for a larger property when it's not their fault that they haven't got anything that they can downsize to, when, you know, they'd be quite content with a one-bedroom property, but there aren't enough for them to move into. And it won't only be older people, so I'm glad that you've got that, that you're looking into the needs of older people, and I would think some of them would be, or a lot of them would be older people, but there might be just, or there's likely to be a range of people who family no longer live with them and could easily move downsize, freeing up their family size home, but they're not ready for accommodation for older people. They wouldn't put themselves into, you know, the older category. So it seems to me an opportunity missed if that's not being looked into.
Can I ask Councillor Jan Osborne to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a debate for when the policy comes forward to Cabinet, that's for sure, and it looks like it'd be an interesting debate and a challenging one as well. But can I just add that we cannot make people move out of their existing accommodation into a smaller unit, a smaller home rather. We have to, it's about encouraging them to do so. We can't make them do it. We're just wouldn't be right, morally right or legally right to be able to do that. I think also we need to bear in mind that when we build or acquire homes to add to our housing stock, that's the point that we will look at the need for that area and make sure that we're providing either one bedroom, two bedroom, three bedroom, whatever the need is. Also, it needs to bear in mind that when applications come forward to the planning committee for private developers, that they also look at that need in that particular area to see if that planning application is fulfilling that need rather than just an application coming forward.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, thank you. I must say, Chair, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to separate out questions from sort of opinions as to what ought to be happening on this. I mean, my particular thought about under occupation and downsizing is actually that incentives are half or less than half of the answer. That's setting aside what Councillor Grand is saying about, you know, are the houses there anyway, sort of thing. And that really, I think that providing support to help people, particularly senior citizens, downsizing, it's such a challenging thing to move house, particularly downsizing move house, and actually incentives are fine, but what they actually need is a labour-intensive help for them to actually move, assuming there's somewhere there anywhere. And that's very much an opinion, not a question, but I just very difficult to...
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. That's a point that can be borne in mind when officers are preparing this policy. Can we move on to the next slide, please?
Okay, moving on to strategic aim 3, which is homelessness is prevented and our services provide positive and planned interventions. This strategic aim links directly to the homelessness reduction and rough sleeping strategy. Unlike the homes and housing strategy, the homelessness reduction and rough sleeping strategy is a statutory document and it has not been refreshed this year. As it is a statutory document, it will be formally reviewed in 2023 and a revised or new strategy will be published in 2024. A new action has been added to the delivery plan to this effect to review the current strategy and provide a new document in 2024. In terms of achievements, some highlights are we have developed and implemented a comprehensive online advice service for clients to access housing options advice. We have developed a process for offering short-term support and ongoing contact to monitor the progress of clients and reduce the risk of repeated homelessness from temporary accommodation. We have created an informal multi-agency panel to manage, monitor and find housing solutions for the hardest to house clients. And we have rebranded the rent deposit scheme and expanded the Central Suffolk lettings provision. Before I move on to talk about new actions added to this strategic aim, I want to highlight that there are 7 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. A further new action has been added to this strategic aim to ensure that housing teams are working towards the aims and supporting the objectives of the Cost of Living Crisis Action Plan. This is of paramount importance to ensure that homelessness is avoided wherever possible. Questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, obviously during the COVID crisis, there was a national policy to homeless people, and we used hotels and other types of accommodation for this. And as I understand it, we didn't have any homeless people at that time due to that policy. Could you tell me what the current situation is with regard to that? And also bearing in mind I can see that you're going to have, you're planning to look at it during the coming period, but obviously we're about to hit or possibly hit a crisis now in the cost of living, and that might, hopefully not, but might result in more homeless people. How are you going to deal with that in the interim before 2024, please?
Am I? Yeah.
I'll take that question. In terms of dealing with the pending crisis due to the cost of living, we're looking at doing some early prevention work, trying to engage with residents before they approach us, in terms of making people aware of where they can go for help and assistance, working with local CAB, Citizens Advice Bureaus, so that people know where to go and signpost them for help. Obviously making good use of the Household Support Fund as well, to support residents. I'm a great believer of making sure people know where to go for help and understand what we can do for them. So we're making sure that all officers are aware of the different options that residents can go for. And there's obviously trying to have early conversations with residents, you know, making them aware that if you have rent arrears, don't just leave it too late. Please do come and speak to us. We may be able to help and assist you. One of the things we have noticed is that we may be getting calls on our demands for us to help people who are homeowners. So it's looking at how we skill officers to understand where to redirect people for help, making sure they understand that they can talk to their providers, making sure we have good connections with local landlords and agents. So one of the things we want to do is outreach to local agents to say, do you have any tenants that are experiencing any difficulties, have any issues with rent arrears, that you may feel is struggling, please signpost them to us. So we basically want them to be able to refer into our services so we can talk to them as soon as possible. We are part of the cost of living working group at the moment, looking at all the different options out there for residents. I know from the last Household Support Fund tranche that we spent before the end of September this year was that there's a lot of fuel poverty out there, and helping people manage their budgets a lot better, making sure people are maximising their incomes as well. So we're trying to do a bit of partnership working with the Department of Works and Pensions to maybe look at people to maximise their income, get better paying jobs, make sure they're getting all their benefit entitlements. So we're doing lots of proactive things, looking at our offer in terms of triage and early prevention. You know, what does that look like? You know, and how can we reshape the service so that its early intervention work truly is happening?
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up? And then I'll come to Councillor Ekping-Young. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Chairman. Yes, thank you very much for that answer, which I like that proactive approach. So that was one half of my question answered, thank you. The other half was with regard to the current homeless. Do you know the number of current homeless people we have in our districts, please, and what is being done to help the current homelessness, please?
I'll get the numbers up, but in terms of current homelessness, what we're trying to do is engage with landlords, engage with hosts to hold on to people for longer, sort of negotiating with them to look at how they can hold on to people while we find them alternative options. We do refer people to Central Suffolk lettings to try and help them find something private rented. We encourage people to definitely try and find their own accommodation, and we will assist them with rent and deposit. So we do try and get them to be as proactive as they can be, obviously with the help of their personal housing plans. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of preventing them. In terms of numbers, if you bear with me.
Emma, would you like a bit of time to find the numbers rather than we rush you?
Just on the page now, thank you. As at the end of September, we've taken 46 applications in Babergh, and we had accepted 19 in prevention duty and 9 in relief, which means if we've accepted prevention duty, they can remain in their current accommodation whilst to try and relieve or prevent them from being homeless and try and keep them in their existing home. And the 9 in relief means that we haven't been able to prevent their homelessness and we place them in temporary accommodation. And that's just for Babergh. And if I go across, I can tell you what's happening over in Mid-Suffolk. In September, Mid-Suffolk, we had 47 applications were taken from people making a homelessness application. 20 we accepted a prevention duty, and 7 we accepted a relief duty, so 7 went into temporary accommodation. In terms of those numbers, you want to do more prevention, which means they're not being placed into temporary accommodation, which means officers are working really hard to either keep them in their existing homes, which is our first duty. If that's not successful, we will then try and find an alternative accommodation. We have 56 days to do that, so we try and do that within that timeline, you know. So as much as we can, we try and use all the tools available to us.
I'd just like to say thank you very much for that really comprehensive answer. Thank you. It was very helpful. And would it be possible for those numbers to be put in our minutes, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Osborne, is it a response to that question? Yeah, thank you.
Mr.
And
Chairman,
then I'll
be
come
brief.
to Councillor Ekby-Hill.
I will be brief. Yeah, those figures that you asked for are always reported in the quarterly monitoring report. Also, to add to Amar's comments, we are, can't answer for Mid-Suffolk on this one, but in Babergh, we are looking to add into our temporary accommodation so that we can house people when they come forward as homeless. However, as Amar has said, the focus is on prevention rather than cure, very much so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Ekby-Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. I think actually Amar's answered the question I was going to ask, although it does leave another question, which is, I think you said certainly in Mid-Suffolk we'd had 47 applications, and as far as I can do from the maths, you've taken care of 27 of them, so what's happened about the other 20?
Generally, what that generally means is that person might not actually be homeless, you know. So in terms of, officers have to be satisfied that someone is homeless, threatened with homelessness, is eligible. So in those circumstances, you may get someone who calls through to our service, we start taking the application, but as we go through, they don't meet the statutory requirements for an application to be taken, but we will still give them advice.
Thank you very much for that answer. I think it would be actually useful to qualify that response in that regard going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Caston.
Thank you, Chairman. When we're talking about refuges, do we aim to put, so there's a bit on, I haven't actually got the page up now, but there's a starred bit that says a figure includes refuge, which I assume is for domestic abuse. Do we have provision for that within Mid-Suffolk, or do we prefer to use refuges outside of Mid-Suffolk? And should we be having provision for other districts to use a refuge within Mid-Suffolk, if that makes sense? I might need to clarify that, but do you get what I'm asking? Yeah.
Because usually you're right. Usually where you have people fleeing domestic violence, it's usually not safe for them to stay within their districts. I think what we tend to do is we have self-contained units that we can move around between both districts. So if someone couldn't be in Mid-Suffolk, we might tend to place them in the Babergh area and vice versa. So I think that's some of the luxury that we have. But if we needed to try and acquire accommodation elsewhere, that is something that we would look to do. But we are continually looking at our temporary accommodation stock to make sure it's meeting the needs of residents, especially when it comes to domestic abuse. So that's always taken into consideration, you know, depending on where the person's approaching for, how safe they are. General rule of thumb is because someone's fleeing domestic abuse, they're generally not safe in either districts. The law does allow them to approach any local authority in the country where they feel they are safe to make an application. So also through the gateway, we are able to move residents around the partner bodies and our registered providers as well. So we have a lot of good tools and options available for those who are fleeing domestic abuse.
So do you think that we have enough provision to support other districts apart from Mid-Suffolk and Babergh with putting up their customers, or whatever you want to call it, that need a refuge outside of their district?
I think we'd always work in partnership with the other district councils, as we should do. The same way that if we had an issue, we'd go to them for help and assistance. So we have a pretty good working relationship with them, so that's something that we would definitely explore.
Thank you very much. Anyone else, or do we now move on to the next slide? Yeah, thank you, Rebecca.
Okay, moving on to strategic aim 4, which is Babergh in Mid-Suffolk is an effective social landlord known for delivering quality services. There have been a lot of changes to the delivery plan for this strategic aim due to the publication of the Social Housing White Paper and the specific requirements it places on Babergh Mid-Suffolk as a social landlord. In terms of achievements, we have included measures to improve the environmental performance of our housing stock within the Housing Revenue Account Business Plan and Capital Programme. We have put in place measures to ensure we learn from every complaint. We have put in place a new approach to managing complaints of antisocial behaviour. We have reviewed our approach to managing void or redundant stock and have identified measures to make better use of such properties. We have reviewed our housing stock profile and commenced a programme to dispose of properties that are expensive and on low demand. There have been a lot of changes to the delivery plan for this strategic aim due to the publication of the Social Housing White Paper. And as such, there are only 2 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan. In addition, there are 9 new actions added to the delivery plan, and these focus on co-creating, developing and launching a tenant engagement strategy. This is to enable tenants to hold Babergh Mid-Suffolk to account on performance in areas that are important to them in a way that suits them. We'll be refreshing the council's income strategy to ensure that we are best placed to meet the needs of our tenants who are experiencing financial difficulties, and to ensure that income to the housing revenue account to provide new and improved services for tenants is protected. We'll be working with our tenants to constantly improve the ways we communicate with them about matters affecting their homes and neighbourhoods, as we want to ensure that our tenants feel that they are treated with respect and dignity. And building services is to undergo a full diagnostic assessment leading to transformation of the service to ensure that building services is in an optimised position to meet the requirements of the Building Safety Act and to contribute to meeting climate emergency objectives. Success in these new actions will result in compliance with the social housing regulators' requirements and contribute towards delivering a modern landlord service that meets the current and future needs of our tenants.
Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any questions on this slide, please? Councillor Grandin and then Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just check in your section on achieved, put in place a new approach to manage complaints of antisocial behaviour. One of the problems I've had in a couple of situations in my ward, which is Hadley South, have been where tenants have been put in situations where they have a completely different lifestyle to the other tenants that they live close to. Or in another situation, they have a different need due to a particular social need that a particular tenant might have. So you say that you've achieved a new approach to antisocial behaviour. Would that include ensuring that the right tenants are put in into housing that is compatible with people that they live near, or other the other tenants that they live near? Does that include that kind of thing? So, one person's antisocial behaviour isn't antisocial to another age group, for example. Is that included in that statement, please?
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think actually Councillor Grandon is referring to AIM 7, and we've already said it's in relation to the allocations policy that you're referring to, and we have added a new action plan in the action plan, and that's to carry out a health check on our current lettings and allocation policy to ensure that the current arrangements continue to meet the needs of the councils and our residents. So I think Councillor Grandon's concern is actually covered in that new action within the plan.
Thank you very much. Are
Thank
you happy
you.
with that, Councillor Grandon?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there Councillor Matheson, you're next.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that maybe the Scrutiny Committee should put this tenant engagement on its work plan as something to look at. It seems to me that going back years and years and years, that we've always had considerable difficulty with housing boards and tenant committees and one thing and another. And so many things have tried and not really worked. And I mean, it's right to see it sitting there that we're going to look at it again. Good. But it really is something that probably needs a wide wide range of different people's inputs and so forth, and that maybe the Scrutiny Committee is a vehicle for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. We'll consider that when we come to the work plan and when chairs and vice chairs meet next week. Thank you. Happy to move on now to the next slide. Please, Rebecca.
Okay, so Strategic Aim 5, homes are in high quality, sustainable environments served by jobs and community facilities, appropriate green space, effective transport links and other necessary infrastructure. So in terms of achievements, we have ensured our homes and housing strategy is aligned to our economic and community strategies and complements our commitment to stimulate housing-led growth and economic prosperity. We have reviewed the community infrastructure expenditure framework, and delivery of infrastructure continues through regular proactive discussions with infrastructure providers and the community. We have delivered 2 separate infrastructure funding statements for both councils. Before we move on to talk about new actions added to this strategic aim, I want to highlight that there are 5 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. In terms of new actions added to the delivery plan for this strategic aim, we'll be focusing on preparing for biodiversity offsetting when biodiversity net gain becomes compulsory in 2023, by identifying sites and pursuing opportunities for securing net gains in areas that maximise the benefits provided. The successful completion of this action will require partnership working and will result in an increase in biodiversity within the districts.
Thank you. Do I have any questions, please? Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, obviously I'm very proud that the first site that we've actually bought for biodiversity purposes in my ward, but really what I wanted to ask was in terms of that new panel there, what kind of officer member grouping or whatever is actually going to be working on that? I think to know, because it's so new to the councils that we should be doing this, that you know, are we putting the responsibility on members to look out for things, or officers to monitor land that's up for sale or whatever? You know, we can do random things, but what you're setting out there is a definite intention to do it, and I just wonder what the mechanism's going to be. Thank you.
I'd have to get back to you on the actual detail of how it's going to work. The officer who's responsible for that action is Richard Palmy, the Biodiversity Project Manager, and I don't know the specifics of how it's going to work going forward because it's in its infancy, but I can get back to you with some information.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if you're going to cover this later, but on your strategic aim 5 on our papers, you refer to being on track with investigating the viability of installing electric vehicle points on our housing estates. Can I just ask you some questions with regard to that, please? Are the plans to install individual charging points, or are they charging points sort of by, you know, on the pavement or something for kind of shared or in, you know, in the vicinity? Because it just seems to me if they're on individual houses, it seems a high cost to our districts for services that might not be used, whereas if I don't know if your plan is to have them, you know, as shared facilities in near the estate, you know, how do you plan to do that, please?
Robert, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's all part of the viability assessment that will need to be undertaken by the climate change manager. So I think that's a really valid point. I think it's just one that needs to be explored, and that's exactly what this aim is about. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think we can move on to aim 6.
Okay, moving on to... sorry, gone too far. Aim 6. Right, aim 6. Best use is made of private sector land and private accommodation across the districts. In terms of achievements already made towards this strategic aim, we have worked with Suffolk authorities to develop and implement a new approach to delivering disabled facilities grants. We have developed and implemented a project to increase awareness of the availability of support for private tenants in respect of housing conditions and energy efficiency standards. This was supported by a social media campaign in addition to radio and TV adverts. We have increased the number of empty homes which the council supports back into use. This has been supported by a dedicated empty homes officer working across both districts and a new empty homes policy to drive work in this area forward. Before we go on to new actions, I want to highlight that there were 3 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred. 3 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. In terms of new actions, a new action has been added to this strategic aim, focusing on promoting and supporting energy efficiency in homes by targeting all F&G energy performance rated properties in the private rented sector. The successful completion of this action will result in a decrease in F&G rated properties in the private rented sector in the districts, which will contribute to the aims of the Cost of Living Crisis Action Plan by reducing energy costs for residents. A further newly added action is to fully assess the potential demand to support the various emerging refugee and asylum seeker accommodation needs. The successful completion of this action will provide much needed clarity on the way forward to meet increased housing needs, whilst working in partnership with Suffolk County Council.
Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any questions on aim 6? Councillor Scarf, first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hope you can hear, because that's the microphone over there. On the actual papers for Strategic Aim 6, there are a number of interlinked things which build on perhaps the success of Central Suffolk lettings by telling us about the establishment of a new landlords forum to advise and assist landlords. I think that is absolutely crucial in this day and age, because landlords quite often have one property and it can lead to all sorts of problems, and they don't know what grants are available. And I think in assisting them to upgrade their F and G properties and even D energy rated properties to C, which is what we should be aspiring to, I think we should be doing absolutely everything that we can. So I think the question would be, how quickly do you think you could establish an effective landlords forum? Because I think that could play a really crucial role in ensuring access to private sector rented stock, which will assist our residents. Thank you.
Is that something you can answer, Rebecca, or do you need to talk to a colleague and perhaps provide an answer outside the meeting? Thank you. Is that okay? Councillor Muller I had next, and then Councillor Grandin.
Oh, right, okay. You mentioned on this particular slide about the refugees and asylum seekers, etc. What is the latest position with those refugees, asylum seekers from Ukraine, whose 6 months with their host families will be coming to an end this month? Have you been able to house any of those families, or are you finding difficulty housing them? I'm particularly interested in that particular issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll answer that particular question. We've managed to house one family to date in the private rented sector so far, but we are experiencing extreme difficulty due to the lack of supply within the private rented market. Obviously, there's an affordability issue as well. So we recognise that's an issue. We're working very closely with the other districts, looking at our offer to landlords in the private rented sector. We're trying to make sure that we are fair and equitable across the board, so that we're not making one cohort of applicants more attractive than others, but we are mindful that the 6 months is coming up, so we're trying to work with hosts to see if they can hold on to the tenants that guests a little bit longer whilst we try and help them to find alternative accommodation, but it is proving to be quite a difficult experience.
Thank you for that. Councillor Grandin.
My question's been answered, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. Can we move on to the next aim then, please, Rebecca?
Okay, so Strategic Aim 7, which is people live in vibrant and well-connected communities, and homes and communities continue to meet the changing needs of residents. In terms of achievements towards this strategic aim, we have developed a community strategy which encourages greater participation and involvement. We've ensured the draft joint local plan includes policies to increase the supply of specialist and accessible housing. And before we move on to talk about new actions added to this strategic aim, I want to highlight that there are 4 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. Looking ahead, we'll be focusing on the commissioning of an older people's homes development strategy. This would contribute to ensuring greater partnership working and ensuring choice within the arena of older people's housing. We'll also be carrying out a health check on our current lettings and allocation policy to ensure that the current arrangements continue to meet the needs of the councils and our residents.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this slide, please? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hinton.
Yeah, got it. Just a quick one on the older persons strategies. within various parts of this document, and it's a very comprehensive document, and it tends to sort of cover the same ground several times over during the course of the document. It does highlight the fact that both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk have higher than national average populations of older people in the countryside, in the rural areas, rather than in the urban areas, which obviously presents a challenge. What is being done to develop a strategy that is going to give us or enable these residents to stay in well-connected communities, bearing in mind that most of the new builds that are happening across Babergh in particular, I'm not quite sure what the figures are for Mid-Suffolk, 60% of the new builds in Babergh are in the rural areas. So we're effectively increasing the potential for isolation within the rural communities by the older people if we don't come up with some sort of strategy to address the problem.
Are you able to answer that question?
Yeah. One of the things that we're seeking to do as part of this strategy is actually to engage with residents first, to find out where do you want us to develop older people's homes, what type of homes do you want developed as well. And it's also looking at how do we keep people in their homes. I think it's always done about porting people out of where they are, so you're absolutely correct. So most people want to stay where they are, so how do we have a strategy that helps them to do that? And that is involving partnership working across the board with other key stakeholders like health, social care. So we need to be talking to everybody who has a stakeholder in delivering services, as well as I think we need to hear from residents, actually, because they're the key partner. Because from my perspective, somebody who's older now is very different to when a lot of shelter schemes were designed. People are really keen to keep independent and living in their own home. So how do we do that and deliver that? And what does that look like? So I want us to be, we're looking to do a survey where we talk to all residents, not just our tenants, talk to all residents and ask them what that looks like for them and what they would like to be delivered. So I think that's the first port of call in developing the strategy, is having the conversation with the residents first.
Thank you for that. Councillor Scarf and then Councillor Adrian Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's actually on the delivery plan, but it is sort of vaguely referred to up there, so I'll ask the question anyway. 7D on the delivery plan is to bring forward innovative redevelopment opportunities for redundant and underused sheltered accommodation. And it mentions there in the what does a success look like, a successful pilot approach at Hoxton. I wonder if perhaps we can have some just brief detail. What does that look like in terms of redevelopment? Because this is one area which I think we've had a problem with over the years, where we've had perhaps more rural locations with sheltered accommodation which have lots of vacancies. So how does that look?
Is that one for you, Robert? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yeah, I mean, we named Hoxton as the development there because that is the one that we are struggling to let, and we have struggled for a number of years. Partially due to location. I think local transport is a challenge as well there. That's what the residents have fed back to me. So we recognise that there needs to be a bit of a review of our sheltered housing and how appropriate is it for 2022 and how appropriate is it going forward, thinking about the things Emma has contributed there around the older person strategy. So it's all part of the same question really, is how can we make sure that those properties remain attractive as a general service model of sheltered housing, but also on an individual scheme basis. You know, are they viable? Are they going to continue to serve the needs of the communities and the local housing needs there? So Hoxton is there. We have been engaging with the residents. So I don't want to set hairs running around what the outcome of that review will be, but we are acknowledging that there are challenges in certain areas, and Hoxton is one where we're having significant challenges and have had for a period of time. So we recognise that we need to do something innovative and different with that. So undertaking review.
Thank you. Councillor Adrian Osborne and then Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more of a question for our portfolio holder, but for some time now, members have been raising issues and concerns around Gateway being fit for purpose. Apologies if I've missed this, but are we covering this in our action plan?
Councillor Jan Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rather strange getting one from Councillor Osborne, but there you go. Yeah, I think I've actually already alluded to this, and I did ask officers to add, and it is on there in 7.1 of Strategic 7, which is to carry out the health check on our current lettings and allocation policy to ensure that the current arrangements continue to meet the needs of the councils and our residents. And that includes the gateway as well. And I understand, looking at this, that health check has been completed. And I've just sent an email to our officer asking for what those recommendations are. So it'd be interesting to see what those recommendations are. But that health check would include, with the allocation policy, also the look at gateway to see that it is being effective and it is fit for purpose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are you happy with the response, Councillor Osborne?
Yeah, very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I could be probably not getting any lunch today.
Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there's any consideration that with the Hoxton example, and there will be others in our kind of larger villages where we've got these, and I've heard that kind of problem's been running with us for quite a while. The possibility of actually supporting services, particularly, I suppose I'm thinking about community-run shops open for 3 days a week or whatever. To doing more to support and encourage things like that, or retention or starting, as a different way of approaching the problem.
Is that a matter for housing, or is that something we'd rather discuss with communities? Because it does seem to be, it's building up the community that's... Yeah. Yeah. Robert.
I could try if I'm not coughing, sorry. It's the end of a cold, don't worry, I don't want to say anyone worry. Yeah, just to say, I think it's a good point. I think we need to look at all the options there. It's a question for sort of the local economy and communities as well. And I think that links in nicely with the outcomes framework and the objectives there, which is a broader thing, looking at what does a vibrant community look like and what do services look like for our residents. So I think it's a good point, and just to reassure you that corporate managers are working across teams to look at those kind of things. But no, it's a good point, well made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ekpe-Yong.
Thank you, Chairman. I observe from a lot of the commentary that there are some conflicting requirements within the homeless and housing strategy and the community strategies. And I note that Councillor Hinton claims that a lot of the development, new housing development in Babergh at least, is occurring in rural districts. So that would suggest that we're building bigger communities. But I guess my concern is that if we're building more houses in rural areas, to what extent are we taking account of the fact that people need to downsize, and that conflicts with them not wanting to move from their homes, and the need to essentially provide a structure whereby those developments actually cater to the strategies that we're developing for housing in communities. And also, I'm very conscious of the fact that throughout the discussion so far, there's not really been any nod to well-being, which I think is also an important aspect, particularly with regard to more older folk like myself.
Thank you. Is that something you can address, or is that sort of a cross-service issue? And I think it's not just older folk, I think it's any folk living on their own potentially would need support or access to services. I think that there are probably points there that we would like to refer to Cabinet when this goes forward, and for Cabinet then to decide where best they can be addressed, if you're happy with that.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Councillor Jan Osborne, and then I'll come to Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, in relation to that, we do, in the action plan, we do include links to those various other strategies, including the community strategy, the wellbeing strategy as well, so, and the cost of living crisis action plan, the 5-point plan. So we are very conscious of those other strategies within our own action plan. And as our officer has already alluded to, we do work very closely across all the services. Sometimes you'll get a bit of conflict, but we work very hard to reduce that conflict to an absolute minimum. But we do work across the services. We're not just isolated in our own little box and work within the housing box. But no, there's clear links in the action plan to those strategies, including the wellbeing strategy, because it is very, very key to what we're trying to deliver on in housing.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I thank the portfolio holder for that point. That does cover some of what I wanted to say, that the AIM 5, I think hidden within AIM 5 in the detail will be those connections and the fact that improving the environment, etc., etc. You know, we do recognise that is, you know, that is part of well-being as well as part of housing, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matheson. Can we now move on to the next aim, please, Rebecca?
Okay, moving on to strategic aim 8, which is everyone has a suitable home and residents are able to live as healthily, safely, independently as possible within sustainable communities. In terms of achievements, we have identified strategic objectives for carbon reduction from our housing stock to contribute to corporate and county-wide climate emergency objectives. These were set out in the recently approved Housing Revenue Account Business Plan. We have prepared a broad specification for new build council stock to include consideration of passive technologies and measures to increase accessibility. Again, this was set out in the recently approved new build design guide, which was an appendix to the Housing Revenue Account Business Plan. There are 6 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. But in terms of new actions, a new action has been added to this strategic aim to take forward measures to improve the environmental performance of our housing stock. This will contribute to reducing carbon emissions and meeting national targets for all social homes to be EPC rating of C or above by 2030. This will also contribute to corporate and county-wide climate emergency objectives and links to the cost of living crisis action plan, as it will reduce energy costs for tenants.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this aim? If not, we'll move straight on to the next one, please, Rebecca.
Okay, finally, strategic aim 9. Both councils have strong relationships with residents, developers and other partners that enable us to deliver housing, infrastructure and services effectively and to innovate where appropriate. In terms of progress towards achieving this strategic aim, we continue to maintain our strong relationship with Homes England in order to optimise the funding streams for which we are eligible. We continue to work collectively as local authorities within Suffolk to support the effective delivery of services in relation to housing through the means of the Suffolk Housing Board. We continue to provide support to neighbourhood planning groups to create and make effective plans. And we continue to engage regularly with registered providers and potential new providers to increase the supply of new homes. Before I move on to new actions, I want to highlight that there are 3 actions from the original delivery plan that have been transferred to the new delivery plan that officers are continuing to work on. Next, we will be focusing on developing a neighbourhood strategy and policy, setting out how we will work with our tenants to improve the areas they live. This will include reviewing our approach to the management of garages. The successful completion of this action will result in a new strategy and policy adopted and targets set for improvement in satisfaction and a set of service standards with a linked set of key performance indicators. A further new action sets out how the Suffolk Housing Board will be identifying and taking forward projects which address housing inequalities that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which meet the criteria for funding allocated by Suffolk public sector leaders, and this will bring benefits for residents in both districts.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions on aim 9, or any general questions? Councillor Grandin.
I'm interested in what direction you think you might be going regarding the management of garages. Councillor Osborne knows that I have a situation in my ward where a resident is seeking to rent one of our garages, and nothing, he's not heard from anyone, and he's keen to do so, but this might make you think that there aren't many people looking for garages, and perhaps there aren't. But I just wondered your direction at the moment, please.
Is that one for you, Robert? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think the individual inquiry, I think I'm familiar with the one, but I'm happy to have a conversation outside of the meeting about that. Garages, we have an awful lot of garages across both districts, and they often fall to the bottom of the pecking order in terms of priorities. So this project here is about putting in a bit of a review as to how we might best manage those going forward, making sure that we can let them quickly, that our waiting lists are clear, and there's a bit more transparency around the process for people to understand, if they're applying for a garage, what the process is. It's far from straightforward. I won't go into the details now, but people don't necessarily want a garage. I'm not going to go into the details. Yes, suffice to say, we recognise that we need to adequately resource our garage service, and we'd like to make it better and fit for purpose going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hinton and then Councillor Ekping-Yong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that you're working closely with the housing board to secure funding, etc., for social housing, etc. Bearing in mind that our current policies, I think in both councils, say that we want about 30% affordable housing out of any development, and we've got in both councils a considerable number of applications that haven't been started. Are there any proposals to work closer with developers to try and get some of these developments started? Because when we've got sort of 10 years worth of permissions or housing target already granted in terms of permissions, it does rather sort of make a bit of a joke of giving more and more permissions when nothing's actually started on some of these sites. And just for Councillor Eppignon's benefit, in last year in mid-Suffolk, 148 homes were built in urban areas, 524 were built in rural areas. That's higher than 60% in the rural areas. So we're both in similar situations in terms of most of the development is taking place in rural areas rather than in urban areas.
Yeah, thank you for that. Was there a question there?
Yes, it's about addressing the planning.
Is it one? Sorry, I mean, is it one that you can answer, or is it more a joint local plan?
No, we need to liaise with somebody in planning to get a response.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ekping-Yong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Hinton, for those statistics. I really appreciate it. And actually, I have a subsidiary to Councillor Hinton's question, which is, if we have that many, and I'm sure you can't answer it, but someone needs to be looking into it. If we have that many outstanding applications for development that haven't been exercised, should we be not thinking to withdraw them or do something about enforcing them? That's kind of the first point. And with regard to garages, we have rather a lot of them, as the officer has mentioned. And I guess there are two questions. One is, do we need that many? And B, if we don't, what's the plan for getting rid of them and putting something useful in their place?
Robert, is that a plan that you're going to come forward with after doing some research, or is it something you can answer now?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think my focus has been on my responsibility as corporate manager for tenant services around managing the current garages in their current form. There was a review, or there has been some reviews carried out as to suitability for garage sites and what we might do with the land they sit on if they're in low demand. So there is a piece of work going on, but not something I can comment on directly. Yeah, so I think it's a good point.
Councillor Jan Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just add to that, there's a comprehensive report coming to Cabinet in January on the garage review, because we were hoping that a lot of the garage sites would be suitable for development, but it's not proven to be the case. It's proven to be more challenging than we anticipated. So we sort of set up a traffic light system on the various sites throughout Babergh and Mid-Suffolk. But there'll be a report coming forward to Cabinet in January.
Thank you. Right, I think we've finished questions, so can we move on to debate? Councillor Muller.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. A very, very good report. Thank you very much for that. Really enjoyed reading that. The reason I raised about the refugees, I had the opportunity back in August this year. I was invited to an open evening which was hosted by the Stowmarket Tesco manager, where the Tesco's happened to be in my ward, where he had the evening for Ukrainian refugees and their hosts. And I did speak to a number of the refugees that were there. Some of them were families, some of them were single people. And the majority of their hosts who they're living with were in the rural areas. And one of the biggest concerns they had was that there was no public transport to get them. So they were very keen to move into the towns. And I'm wondering, I've heard in the past where we had with the Afghan refugees, where most of them prefer to live in the towns rather than in the rural areas, purely because A, there was more of their community that they could liaise with. And we've got a similar position that I read in the paper over the weekend, where there's the Novotel Hotel in Ipswich is being taken over by about 85 refugees or migrants that have crossed the channel. And the leader of the Ipswich Borough Council was complaining that there's only about 3 that are in other sort of hotels across the district. So you obviously liaise with your colleagues in Ipswich, because obviously they probably couldn't house all of those. So I'm actually interested going forward, and thank you for your answer regarding there is a shortage of private housing and social housing. Where are these people going to be housed? Because it's not really satisfactory for families to be housed in hotels for any length of time. That was just a thing I thought I'd bring up in debate, Chair. Thank you.
Is there a question you can answer?
I will try my best.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Not easy, I appreciate it.
I think it's a situation we hadn't envisaged back in March 2022, that we'd be in this situation. I think the 6 months, the idea of the 6-month hosting was hopefully that the Homes for Ukraine applicants would be able to resolve their issues, get into some sort of work, be able to apply for benefits, which is why they were passported through, so they didn't have to do the habitual residency check. So I think we're in unprecedented times. It's not just Babergh and Mid-Suffolk, because I think it's the whole country. What we're going to do with people, we don't know. That's the honest answer. We will try our best to house them where we can. Definitely putting families into B&B is not ideal. The legislation and guidance has been changed when it comes to Homes for Ukraine. We technically lawfully can house them in B&B for longer than 6 weeks. However, it is recognised that it's not, hotels aren't ideal for families. It's not conducive. It doesn't help young children to thrive. It impacts on their mental well-being. So we have a statutory duty to them if they end up being homeless, and we will use our statutory duties to accommodate and help them. So if that means that we move them on to more settled accommodation in terms of self-contained temporary accommodation, that's what we will have to do. So we are looking at our options of the numbers we might be looking at. What does that look like, and what do we have available to us? So that is something that we are constantly looking at, because regardless of anything that happens, if they end up being homeless and meet that statutory definition, our duties kick in and we will have to accommodate them, and it will mean that we will move them as swiftly as we can through the B&B route. B&Bs are only used in emergency situations, so if we don't have anything else available to us, then we will look at what else we have to place them into.
Thank you. Has anyone given any thought or looked at the recommendations, giving any thought to any proposal? Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't looked at that aspect of it. There were a few points that I noted that were clearly not questions, but views that I wanted to put. So this seems to be the time to come back over those. On the aim number 1, was it? Yeah, on aim number 1, we're working to the new design guide. I'd like to suggest that really the new design guide is not ambitious enough and not up to date effectively, because we've just had a discussion with officers about a potential redevelopment site. That's to say our own site. And it said, well, we're hoping to achieve EPC-B. I said, well, that's just not good enough. We shouldn't be building houses to that standard. And it said, well, the answer is, well, it's going to meet the design guide, and that's just not good enough anymore. So that seems to me a fundamental problem, that we're never going to achieve a really good average if we carry on building stuff that isn't to the highest standard. So that's really one point I wanted to make. And closely related to that, on page, what's that, page 11, I just want to see which aim that was a minute. Page 11, I see. Aim 6, where we're talking again about the energy performance certificates and so on. I was trying to untangle in my mind about this decreasing the F and G. There's sort of, how do we know the properties that are that bad unless they actually come back onto the market? And if they come back onto the market, the government has got a yardstick, which I forget what it is, but that they can't be rented out unless they're at least, is it F or is it E, or is it shifting soon up a notch? So how do we know, and aren't they all going to be weeded out anyway? And I would have thought that success is going to look like eliminating F and G, frankly, not decreasing it. So I think that whether there's any bit more help about how that actually works that you can give us, as to what government are saying about that. And then the final point related into all of that is that the county's just bought some infrared scanners, and the purpose of these is to look at properties and see how leaky they are in heat, which is obviously going to be work for the winter, starting soon, and whether that's got some part to play, and whether we should. They're only getting 10 for the whole county at the moment, and they're going to be lent out to voluntary groups. I wonder whether we ought to be buying half a dozen of our own, because I do remember years ago we actually got such a device and looked at the Needham Market HQ site, which is currently being demolished, to see how very leaky it all was. And it was interesting that the leakiest bit was actually the window frames, fascinatingly. So can we think about actually getting the equipment to go and look for these properties, but also, how is it going to work generally in decreasing? And I would say it ought to be, for success, ought to be to eliminate G and then to eliminate F over not very many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matheson. I wonder whether these are points that we want to pass on to Cabinet when they're considering the strategy, rather than for every point that we make to have an answer to today. So you're happy with that? So they're points that officers will have noted. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, on that point, this is not going to Cabinet. This is just for scrutiny, to scrutinise. The only thing I would suggest is that any recommendations that come out of this, obviously officers will look at to see how we're going to implement them, but it isn't going back to Cabinet.
It's not going back to Cabinet.
And can I, on that first point, on the design guide, the design guide that's referred to in Strategic Aim 1 is a design guide to guide the council on houses that we acquire or build ourselves to add to our social housing stock. It isn't relevant, although we're going to try and encourage developers to refer to that design guide. It hasn't got any clout in as far as developers go. You really need to be looking at the Suffolk design guide, which is the guide that will give when an application comes to the planning committee.
That's what we were talking about, the Suffolk design guide, isn't it?
There is, sorry Mr Chairman, yeah, there is the design guide that's referred to in Strategic Aim 1 is the one that we're using in relation to houses that we build or acquire to add to our housing stock.
Right, thank you. So thank you for the correction. Our comments then don't go to Cabinet, although that was the suggestion, I think, from officers that we do pass our comments to Cabinet. Councillor Epingham.
Well, before I make a comment, Mr Chairman, I wonder if any of the officers could tell us what is the average EPC rating of the housing stock in our district is and how that compares nationally.
Does anyone have that available? Is that, would that be a written answer? Yeah.
I can't say definitely because I haven't got that in my head sitting here, but I do know that I believe that about 28% is already on an EPC-C. And as for the other figures, we're endeavouring to reach those by 2030 to get them to a C. But I haven't got the figures who are on F and G, I'm afraid.
So it's probably not as relevant what the average is, but how many are in each of the different bands is what we probably need to know. And then that's something that we can use as a benchmark to see where we are in 12 months' time. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I think Councillor Osborne, was, those figures was referring to our stock, and I think that the question was actually a wider question than that. Now, it happens that 3 or 4 years ago, I took a great deal of interest in these matters and pursued them through our building control people and planning people and up to the ministry, to try and get some kind of a yardstick that we could use to see how our climate change objectives were working or could work and so on. And it is quite difficult to get hold of satisfactory figures for the district at large, as Councillor Eppingham's question, but we need to try and get as much as we can of that information, you know, because then we'll know how difficult the problem is and so on and so on. Yeah, our own stock, easy, you know, we know what they all are. The rest of it, as I was, you know, alluding in my point earlier, that we find out on an individual, well, both, I think both owner-occupied and private rented accommodation, as they go through the marketplace, we find out what the EPC is. Now, whether we can actually garner that information going through the market, I don't know, but that seems as if that's the best that we can get of what the position is across the whole market, across the whole district, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure Councillor Matheson's dissertation was very helpful, actually, but I think that the point of the matter is that in terms of the stock of housing that the council's building, and given the direction of the design guide, I think that, you know, we are aiming for B, that is very clear, and I think actually when we sift through all the numbers, I think you will find that will ultimately put these two districts in a very good position in terms of the APC ratings of its housing stock, because we also have to balance the need to do that with also building affordable homes that people can afford to buy and rent. So there is a pragmatic situation that we also need to cope with. And I'm pretty sure that if we continue along this trend, we will have actually some of the best housing stock in Suffolk.
Thank you for that. Jan Robinson would like to have a
I
word.
just want to clarify, Chair, about where it goes.
Yeah.
So the report is not coming back to Cabinet, but of course your comments, if you have concerns or even compliments, your comments can still go to Cabinet. You have that power. So any comments or matters that you want raised with Cabinet, you can take to Cabinet, irrespective that the report is not coming back to Cabinet as such.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. And I particularly welcome that, because I think, if there is an opportunity for us to raise anything where we've had an issue today, that is to be taken on board. I think my comment would be generally about the way that this has been presented this year as opposed to previous years, and I would say that I would like to congratulate officers for the way that they've actually done it. I like the yellow highlighting in the report because it's very helpful to sift out what are new actions and what are not new actions. I like the condensing of those actions where we've actually took them into business as usual. I think that's been extremely helpful. There was a bit of dichotomy between the slide presentation and the actual paper presentation, which gave members a little bit difficult. So you tried to work it into, I think it's referred to into that. But I think overall, I welcome today's presentation by officers, because I think for clarity purposes, it's been much easier for members to actually look at it and make constructive comment on it. So thank you.
Councillor Adrian Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to compliment the officers as well. I think it's been a very, very good presentation, and the work that has gone into it has been absolutely great. There has been difficulties, as Councillor Scarf has alluded to. I would just like to add that there has been quite a lot of work on housing, older housing stock, particularly in Sudbury. I'm only talking roughly at Sudbury, and that has been well looked at, and it's taken a few years to get there, but the insulation, new insulation that's been put in, and the areas that have been improved has certainly made a lot of difference. And I obviously, as Councillor Matheson has stated, I'd like to see that carry on. And also, coming from a planning point of view, we have had situations where the the Suffolk Design Guide has been commented on lots of occasions where we've had to refuse applications on the basis that the design wasn't good enough. And I think that's where we should be going from on that point. But well done, the officers, and thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. So, where do we go with recommendations, motions, proposals, and so on? I think it's fairly clear, if people agree with Councillor Scarf, that we do need to be informing Cabinet. But I think, Councillor Hinton, you've got a comment before we move any further.
On this business of when you look at the recommendations on the papers, where it talks about where appropriate provide comment, I think it's important that we do provide some comment, and I've noted down during the course of the discussions a couple of points here, one of which was that there should be flexibility in the housing stock to enable a more mobile occupancy, e.g. downsizing, so that the housing stock that we put together maintains its flexibility. We can't change what we've already got, but we can influence the new stock that comes along and make sure that it fits into those and complements that aim. And also that endorse a proactive support system in times of stress, e.g. the current cost of living crisis, which has been mentioned by the officers, I think is important as well. Otherwise, most of it is covered within the document itself, which, as I said, is very comprehensive. Sometimes, as I said earlier, a bit too comprehensive, and it seems to cover the same bit several times. But it's better that it's covered several times than not at all.
Would members be happy if we were then to pass our verbal, obviously to write out the verbal comments, not for us to appear, but to put together the comments that have been made by members and pass them on to perhaps the portfolio holders and cabinets, so that the portfolio holders can take these into account, and cabinets, when they debate any issues around these strategies, that they take them into account. So is something like that acceptable? Councillor Ekpignon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's very acceptable, but I think we should include officers as well as Cabinet in that. I'm sure the officers have been taking note of the various comments that have been being made in regard to the review this morning. And whilst we all acknowledge that it's been a pretty comprehensive document that's been put in front of us to look at, and we very much welcome that, then there are obviously a number of points that have been raised during the course of the discussion that I believe officers have indicated they would take on board. So I think that in the recommendations or the comments back, we not only include Cabinet, but we should include officers as well. Thank you. As well as the portfolio holder.
So is Councillor Caston?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good way of doing it. I just wanted to just remind members. Councillor Matheson, I think, made a really good suggestion a bit earlier in the meeting about the need to, when you to support families downsizing with financial. Maybe, I think you're alluding to financial help with the actual move, which...
Yeah, well, I mean, not only that, it's the actual... We've said, incentive money, you will save rent, here's 500 quid towards the new carpet sort of thing, but that wasn't what I was talking about. What I was talking about was the actual organisational, you've got to get hold of a removal firm, you've got to sort out all the rubbish in your attic, and all that sort of thing. And what I'm saying is actual physical people help that they need. And I noticed Councillor Hinton actually referred downsizing again, so I think that's certainly something that's shared around the committee, that we do something more than perhaps what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I'd quite like to see somewhere in here attached, something that supports the officers doing what it sounds like they want to do with the country homes, a potential downsizing of the country homes, and some form of support like that. I think I thought that was a really good line to go down. So I think your suggestion with how we attach members' comments onto this is a really good one, but I'd like to see that looked into a bit more. I think that's...
You mean the community shop kind of point I made? In terms of rather, Hoxton, do we find out a different use for the houses, or do we actually put more service into the places that have got unlet or difficult to let sheltered housing? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I wasn't talking... No, I was talking more about the downsizing and the support that you were talking about, because it is obviously a massive obstruction to releasing a whole load of bedrooms and capacity within our housing system. So really important. So I'd like to see that included.
Could I read out my scribbles and see if at least that may be a start on some sort of proposal that someone might like to sign up to? Joint overview and scrutiny informs cabinets or well, perhaps not cabinets, informs the members reviewed the contents of report JOS 2217, including the appendices, and request that portfolio holders and officers take account of verbal comments made by members of the committee, and Cabinet also bear those comments in mind when debating the refocused delivery plan and the refreshed joint homes and housing strategy and the joint homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. Members of the committee supported the strategic aims of the joint homes and housing strategy and agreed that the newly focused plan is reflective of the current challenges facing the housing sector whilst continuing to deliver the aims set out in the strategy, and ask portfolio holders and officers to consider further provision of financial and physical support to residents wishing to downsize. Is that okay? Is anyone prepared to propose that?
I propose that. I'm just wondering whether there's anything else that other members wanted to make apart from that one point that we have on the other side.
Well, all of the other comments are wrapped up. The report will be going on to the portfolio holders. I mean, more or less in the form of the minutes of this meeting. It will go on to the portfolio holders. It will go on to officers besides just the ones who've done such sterling work this morning, and also on to cabinet members. So those who need the comments will see the comments, and I think it's right to support the strategy, the work that the officers have done in refocusing the plan. And I think the key thing that has come out of this, or one of the key things, only one, but one of the key things is that there needs to be a look at how to support people wishing to downsize. So, do you want me to read it out again, or are you content with that? You're happy with that? Councillor Caston.
Side of things, but it's a lot more complicated than just going, oh, retirees want to live in country homes as bus services, and sustainability and that to think about. So I did originally think that we should be, it's quite important to be looking at those country homes for people alongside the downsizing. I think that will probably come with that, because it's quite obvious, and it was brought up by officers in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You're happy with that?
I'm happy with that. Is what I'm trying to say.
Is somebody going to propose? Yes, certainly.
Can I just ask you, please, to add, maybe in brackets or something, that the downsizing shouldn't only refer to older people, that it should be to all demographics, please? Because I don't want it to be simply answered by the report that's coming up regarding older people. I want it to be looked at more broadly than that, please.
So it's financial and physical support to all residents who wish to downsize. Yeah? Councillor Hinton.
If I could put a comment in there, I endorse what you're saying there. But if you look within the report, it talks about both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk are classified as predominantly rural areas. Surprise, surprise. Although deprivation levels are low compared with national levels across Suffolk, 28% of those identified as income deprived live in rural areas. Living in a very rural area is widely considered to cost households an average of 20% more than a similar household living in an urban area. So all households having the opportunity to downsize to save costs and to reduce that deficit, I think is very important. I endorse that addition that Councillor Grandon's put forward.
Thank you very much. So do I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Grandon and Councillor Caston. Thank you very much.
Well, Councillor Matheson was originally proposed that.
Right, so
you don't get a bonus for it.
I was putting my hand up to second his proposal because, to be fair, Councillor Matheson brought that.
Right, so Councillor
Councillor Grandon second.
Your Councillor. Sorry, who's the? I'm lost now. Who has...
Sorry, Matheson proposed, Grandon second.
Right, okay. Councillor Matheson is proposing, Councillor Grandon is seconding, and Councillor's happy with that.
Gets a brownie point.
With that, we'll take this to the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That is 9 votes for, so that is unanimous.
Thank you very much. Can we then move on to forthcoming decisions list? Has anyone got any comments they want to make? Thank you. Then the decisions list is for noting. The Action Tracker, item 9 JOS 2219, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee Action Tracker. Having made the comment myself that we will try to put more into that Action Tracker for the next meeting, are you happy to just note the Action Tracker as it stands for the time being? Yeah. Thank you very much. Babergh members. Your Overview and Scrutiny work plan. Are you content to note that, bearing in mind that your Chair and Vice Chair will be discussing that again next week? I've got nods all round, so that is noted. Mid-Suffolk members, are we all happy or content to note the Mid-Suffolk work plan? Thank you very much. Yes, so thank you. The work plan is for noting. That concludes the business of this meeting, and the time is 11:25. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, officers. It's been a very full morning. You've done sterling work, and thank you for all the responses you gave and for the presentation too. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?